Welcome, everybody. Glad you can make it. Just a few things to go over. We're working on a new website. I have somebody working on it, and we're hoping to get it up live next week. It's just taking a little bit of time. And then just some couple of upcoming meetings. February 16th, this will be more of a SMPTE-based meeting by leader, monitoring video, audio, and ANC data in a hybrid SDI IP world. That'll be presented by Joseph Castellano. And then in March, LumenServe will be presenting. Most likely both of those will continue to be on Zoom, but we are looking to the possibility of in-person meetings, just kind of based on the comfort of everybody with that. So you may get an email asking your thoughts on that. Anyways, so we have Doug and Jacob here that will present to us, and let me make Jacob the host. There you go. And so I'll just hand it off over to you guys.
Okay. Well, while Jacob is pulling up the presentation, I'll tell you that I read in the New York Times today that the Omicron is starting to peak in the places where it was worst the first. So if you're planning events in the future, I think it might be looking like the curve that we had in April of last year going into the summer. So hopefully, knock on wood, that's the case. So thank you for having us. This is an intimate crowd, so you know, feel free to stop us and ask questions along the way. Don't hold back. Just let us know if you're thinking about something, and or if you've got an anecdote or an example that you think would be interesting. Just stop Jacob or I, and we'll chat. So this presentation was written for the Texas Broadcasters Association, the TAB, for their August show, and we've adapted it for you guys tonight. And it was a session that Jacob and I did called "I Told You We Would Use That Old Codec as a Backup Someday." Without further ado, I will introduce my buddy and partner in crime, Jacob Daniluck. Jacob Hello, is the tech sales expert for the Americas for Tieline. He's been with the company for more than 11 years. He's a very, very bright fella. If you guys have any questions, audio, he can help, and he wants to help. So he's probably the best audio guy on this side of the planet when it comes to codecs.
You're too kind, Doug.
And only because he only serves half the world. So with that, we'll get started, and this will take about 20 minutes, unless you stop us, but we'll take as much time as you guys want tonight. So so Jake, if you'll go on to the next slide, and just here we go. The first thing we'd like to say is that we'd like to thank the healthcare people, because they've been on the front lines. And when you see a nurse or a doctor or an orderly or whoever it is that's around sick patients like this, give them a pat on the back or a fist pump or whatever, and say thanks, because they're the ones that are really in the trenches with this COVID thing. Jake? So the two key takeaways from the last 24 months, we've learned how to adapt to a new reality. It's a new normal. The perception of professional broadcasters has brought to light how important it is to connect to the people that you want to chat with over the air. So it's a new world, and I don't think we're ever going to see what we had 2 years ago. Jake? The tools are out there. You can do it with a little bit of budget or you can go all out. The most expensive isn't always the best way to go. I think we'd all agree with that. Sometimes you need better stuff, sometimes you don't. The main thing to remember is that your hosts know what works for them and what doesn't. So, there are going to be people who don't get the technology, and you don't have the time necessarily to teach them, or they just don't have the aptitude for it. So, it really is about what your folks can handle and what you can afford. Jake? So when COVID hit and it started causing business to close, it was imperative to get a solution in place. Everybody was given a piece of equipment. This was everything from high quality AOIP equipment, as well as free solutions like Clean Feed and Skype. So what started out as being a temporary fix, in a lot of cases has turned out to be the forever fix. You can make a decision now whether or not you want to keep it the way it is, if it's good enough, or if you think you need to upgrade it because it's now the new normal. Jake? I think you missed one.
Yeah, sorry, new PC build tonight. Sorry,
Keep
did it
going
right
back.
before this.
Go
One
back.
more.
Yep.
There we go. Sorry.
All right. So hosts are now comfortable with doing their shows from other locations, since the infrastructure has been built for them to get through it. Now the question becomes, how do we take the lessons of the last 2 years and create a more comprehensive and budget-friendly method of broadcasting going forward? You've got kind of an infrastructure now that you've probably got under control, but what needs to change? You're probably reassessing things to see kind of, how can we do this better? Or are we spending too much money on this equipment? Do we need to scale it back? Or do we bring people back to the studios in-house? So, Jake? So if we back up a little bit, the pandemic created an unprecedented challenge. It forced us to distance. Broadcasters were compelled to form contingencies, allowing everybody to be safe and to go live and voice track and remote from home. So if you look at the studios here, I mean, they're empty in some cases. It was like, there was a natural disaster and everybody just fled the building. Virtualization was forced on us. And as engineers, your goal was to minimize the disruption. But the problem was you had limited physical access to studios. Jake? So this was a heat map back in summer of 20. And I keep it up there because it was always changing, and it still is. Now, today, it would be, probably solid red, because there are 10 times as many cases out there. So the net workflows at that time and now still differ depending on market size, population density, and the geographic proximity to hotspots. So if you're still kind of in a place where it's still really, really hot, like in the Northeast, it was the Midwest a couple of months ago, it was the Southeast a little bit before that. So it really kind of depends. It's been a fluid situation of who is and how many are working away from the studio. Again, in smaller places, and this is Grand Island, Nebraska, or Grand Isle, I should say. In smaller remote markets with low number of cases, there have been there's been less need to work remotely because there are fewer employees and lower general population density. People spread out a little bit more. There's some disruption, but not near as much as everywhere else. But in this case, in Grand Isle, I use this as an example because they have a big university, a meatpacking company, or a coal mine. In this case, it's a big meatpacking, one of the largest in the country, facility. And from the beginning of COVID till now, that's been a high risk place to be because of that meatpacking company. And then you have places like Dallas and Denver. You know, I live in Dallas. That's why I put this picture in there. It's been really disruptive. I have a relative that manages high-rise office buildings, and she tells me that still to this day, very few people are in the office buildings. So it's been very disruptive. The main studio automation for radio companies has been put to the test. Talent broadcasting live still and voice tracking from living room studios. You know, in a lot of cases, the engineers are still the only ones in the building. I know in Cumulus in Dallas, the salespeople still are working from home. They're scrambling to keep live content on the air. Nobody was prepared for this. And the solutions ranged from, and still do, from cheap short-term fixes to high-quality long-term setups. Jake? So we were forced to test, and I put that in quotes, the viability of remotely producing content. We've always been good at that. It's radio, we do remotes, right? But now it was an extreme case of that. So even though remote broadcasting was not new, many companies were still caught without a plan, and that to me was shocking. Engineers and IT professionals cobbled together low-cost and low-quality solutions as a fast fix, and many of the engineers were now working at home. The number of hardware codecs everybody had on hand was less than what they needed, and so then a lot of people resorted to lower quality solutions. And the longer talent broadcasts from home, the greater the need for better remote equipment, because, and I'll get into this in a minute, it drives away listeners. Engineers found ways to smooth out the roughness of short-term fixes through creative necessity and higher quality equipment acquisition. We sold a lot of VIAs over the last 2 years, and Bridget's as well. Overall, management's happy with the test. So, you know, I give you guys a clap and a golf clap and a high five. So in the beginning, the very beginning of this, Jake and I had a conversation with the God, what do you call them now? The intercom. What's their name now?
Odyssey.
Odyssey. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And they described to their on-air crew that pretend like it's camping. And in a lot of cases, including theirs, their staff was, you know, still working from home. You know, the birds chirping, the lawnmowers, dogs barking, the Amazon guy. I mean, when the Amazon guy comes to my house, my dog goes crazy. And if I'm on a call, it just, you know, it disrupts everything. And that was happening to people that were on the air in their living rooms. Still is. Subpar acoustics, audio drops, late audio delivery, kids playing outside, basketballs bouncing, you know, the whole deal. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. In the beginning, people thought it was kind of cute, that it was cool to have some rough kind of things coming out of the speakers. You know, that it makes the show sound more real, more local. But what really happened was that over time, the jocks were getting frustrated with the drops and the noise and the delays, and the listeners hear it. And what do listeners do when they get frustrated? They hit a button. So, or they tell Alexa to change the channel. So, well, speaking of Alexa, Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. So it was okay. That was better than Mr. Buns. So it's okay. It was okay for a while, but the jocks got frustrated with everything. Listeners hear it too. Cute in the beginning, sloppy if it lasts a little bit too long. So the camping analogy was I guess a good one to convince everybody it was going to be okay, but at the end, it's not. So
and just as an update, the same people who said it's just like camping, I had a conversation with them on Monday. Well, let's put it like this. It's not like camping anymore. They've worked out a lot of their kinks, but there are still some things that I'll get into later. But just as an update from our friends in Odyssey.
Well, that's good to know. And then, if you guys ever need, Bill Eisenhammer knows our equipment inside and out. He's taken apart every unit we've ever made or broken it, one or the other. So the show must go on. So how did they do it? How did the engineers do it? Those with the AYP backbones had a leg up. Much higher level of remote functionality. Flexibility was built into those machines. The disposal of the main studio rule helped. Everybody was rumbling through old equipment to see what still worked. Those guys in San Diego, they were using 10-year-old PCs, codecs that they haven't used. And that's where I got the line, I told you we would use that old codec someday. And that totally has happened in a lot of places. Home broadcast kits were set up in 3 steps. Mics, mixers, headphones, router cables. And those 3 steps are design and implement a process, send the equipment to the DJs at home, instruct them how to set up that kit at home. And you hope that they could do it. So the support for talent was spotty. It's probably a little bit better now because people know how to manage COVID. But yikes, it was a little touchy there in the beginning, and probably still. But the talent is beginning to get more comfortable with the technology, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Jacob. So, Jake, this is where I'm going to hand it off to you to get into more of the solutions. Yeah.
So 2 of the main problems that a lot of at least our clients faced and a lot of other codec customers faced that I've spoken to even about other products was latency and firewall configurations. Normally, we don't have to deal with firewalls too much in remote settings, but essentially what we're doing is when we send talent home with equipment, we are essentially making another studio. It's more of a permanent studio than a temporary studio, depending on how you want to look at it. So it's better to try to configure the firewalls when possible. So those were the 2 bigger problems. So some of the things that you can try to work in to overcome those issues are your codecs of choice. Excuse me. So the first type of codec you could always look at would be something like software. And the question comes in, should you get rid of that old PC? No, you should see my closet. I have every PC from when I was like 12. It's about 20 years worth of computers that I still have, and I use them for different things. I have made laptops routers before. I've used spare old PCs for Shoutcast or Icecast servers to host for audio streams.
To mine Bitcoin.
Yep. I've mined Bitcoin. There are so many other applications for a PC. I consider it e-waste. So should you get rid of them? No, because there are things like For codecs, you could use Zoom or Skype. You could record stuff, just send out a cheap laptop or an old laptop if that's all you need it to do. So there are things you can do with software to get audio communication back to the studio. Now, there are some pros to it. It's cheap. Sometimes it's free because you've already invested in the hardware years ago and it's paid off for itself. But there are some cons to consider. Audio quality is up to the hardware itself. Performance, let's face it, depending on the age of it, you might have to worry about performance a little bit or what you can do with it. Latency will be higher than a traditional hardware codec like a Tieline or a Comrex. We are DSP-based systems. They're specifically designed for this application for lower latency, and I'll get into that down the road. And then sometimes technical support is up to like Microsoft. Do you really want to rely on Microsoft's technical support for Skype or for Teams, or you have Zoom? I've gone through Zoom technical support. I don't know if you guys have or not. It's there, it works, but you have to rely on those other things too. And there are some other things you have to consider when choosing to use software versus dedicated hardware. Or what the other option would be like a hybrid approach. You could use dedicated hardware that could even still be a PC, but more like a phone hybrid. Let's think of hardware purpose built of a phone hybrid. You can do remotes with this. You can use a traditional phone line that your talent might already have. And it would work, but it will sound like a phone call. So, but you still have some pros to it. It's very straightforward. Your talent, I don't know. I've yet to meet somebody who doesn't know how to make a phone call, but at the same time, I have met other types of people. So I'm yet to be surprised there. But the point is of a phone hybrid solution, the more advanced setup is at the studio to route the audio and the phone lines, et cetera. But on the talent end, it's very simple. But again, the biggest con is the quality. So that's another type of solution. Then you can truly get into the hybrid approach of software merging with hardware, reliable hardware like a mobile phone or a more modern PC that's going to give you a faster performance. Well, the hybrid approach of a codec, they're typically lower cost. They do require dedicated hardware still, but it's going to be better hardware than that 20-year-old laptop. Doesn't mean the 20-year-old laptop won't work. It will. It's just this is going to be faster, more improved, more modern. And the setup is a lot more minimal with a hybrid approach like Tieline's Reported or Comrex's Opal or Lucy Live, to name a few. The cons to these solutions, though, when you try to implement this at a home solution is typically latency. And then you also may have to depend on other things like the quality is going to be based on the hardware. So if you're using like WebRTC or SIP, it's going to be based off the hardware. Where if you use something that's more dedicated or designed for audio, it'll give you a little bit better performance there. Then the other thing you have to rely on with these hybrid approaches is going to be coming down to the updates. In my opinion, that's one of the other big ones. Here you have to rely on the manufacturer of both the hardware and the software to essentially synchronize their updates. Let's face it, that doesn't happen too often unless those partners are already colluding or partnering with one another, essentially. That's what I was looking for. And that would be like Apple, Google, and Microsoft teaming together with WebRTC as an example. Yes, you can rely on them to update WebRTC, but now can you rely on the other companies that are implementing WebRTC to maintain and continuously update as well? So those are the types of things you have to rely on with a hybrid approach, with a true hybrid software hardware approach of codec, where you can put your own codec software onto your own hardware. The last approach is what Tieline does. We are a hardware codec manufacturer. So it does beg the question, what is a hardware codec and why would you want one? Well, it's simple. If you're looking for quality, reliability, and being able to do more with your remotes, typically dedicated hardware is going to be for you. Pros, it's dedicated hardware. You install it, it's purpose built for this application. You don't have to worry about tinkering with software or hardware yourself. You typically have support from hardware manufacturers. They do design it typically with quality in mind. I have yet to even meet a hardware manufacturer or see a product that can't perform good audio quality for broadcasters. It's just now how do you implement that codec? You typically get a much wider range of options for encoding and decoding the audio too, so you have more control of that quality. And then redundancy. I didn't talk about redundancy until now because the other solutions for redundancy, it's really left up to you, the end user, unless those manufacturers have specifically gone out of their way. Software developers typically don't. They tend to rely on the operating system developer to handle redundancy or load balancing or some other service. With a hardware codec approach, the developers like Tieline, we've handled the load balancing and the redundancy in our own hardware operating system. So now all you have to do is just configure the redundancy on the platform. And now you have that peace of mind, where the other solutions you have to do everything from the software side to the networking. And that's a lot more intensive. The biggest con though with hardware codecs is the price point. They are a lot more expensive than a traditional software or a hybrid solution. Even in phone hybrids can still get you a good remote solution. Yes, it's going to cost a fair bit, not as much as a codec. It is easier, but it also does the price point is kind of justified for the quality. It's not all there. Where with an audio codec, you can get a much more reliable connection with much higher quality of audio. Now, when you look at some of the solutions would be like play-by-play. As an example, NBC for the Olympics, a lot of their hosts were, or I should say this, some were in press boxes while the others were all in their hotel rooms broadcasting from there. So you would see not everybody on site while some were still back. And then this was also true for the 2020 season of the NFL, 2020 to 2021.
There were still teams this year for the 21 season that the broadcast crews did not travel.
Yeah, like as an example, the Chiefs, Dan Israel, he had limited access for his traveling, and he's the main producer. He's the guy for the Chiefs. So he had to engineer different types of solutions to get different audio from different places back to a central upload location.
I think the Eagles were one of those teams, so the Crawfords probably know a little bit about that. But that broadcast team, I think, was not traveling to the away games.
Yeah, and
we're going to get into that more in detail here in a minute.
Yeah, but when you do consider solution or instances like play-by-play where you still have limited travel, et cetera, you still now have to worry about the equipment. What equipment do you send? Do you quarantine equipment? Luckily with Omicron, it supposedly doesn't live on surfaces as long. Where at the very beginning, as an example, we had a VIA that was exposed to COVID. Well, at the very early stages, nobody knew how long it could live on a surface. Nobody wanted to touch that Tieline VIA for a couple of weeks. We quarantined that product. Let's put it like that.
Well, we didn't quarantine it. The Houston Texans did.
Yeah, we made them do it.
Then we quarantined it again when we got it.
Yeah. So you had to start thinking of those types of risks as well. Now that we know more about the virus, it seems that we may not have to do that final step or that final thing there of quarantining equipment, but it's still a precaution that you have to consider, cleaning the equipment. But now
that became a big thing too.
Mm-hmm.
How do you clean the equipment? And nobody really knew what kind of chemicals to use on
Yeah, you
like
have
their
so many
remote
different
equipment.
surfaces, etc. Like as an example, our G3 codecs were made out of sheet metal, where the Tieline Via is made out of a little bit of aluminum, a little bit of plastic, and an LCD screen. 3 different materials to worry about. So it definitely was a thing you have to worry about, and you should still have a procedure to clean the equipment occasionally. Now, when looking at how did some of these teams do it, or stations and groups do it, like as an example, the Houston Texans, they kept revolving. I think they're still revolving in how they do things over there. But at the beginning, it was very limited access. They essentially had two tie line vias connect, one from away stadiums to the home stadium, and that's where the main play-by-play hosts were, while they had an away sideline reporter with another via at the away game. So again, very limited access to away games, and then a different approach of how you do that play-by-play. Those were where that quarantined equipment came from. But they were using all types of remote AOIP codecs in the field at first until they found a good, reliable solution that could produce redundancy for them. And since then, they've adapted into redundant networks even at the Houston Texans. So in fact, actually, the NFL has adopted a redundant network to add additional redundancies into their remote broadcasts.
Well, another thing about the NFL, the company that was providing the backbone for the stadiums for AOIP, because of COVID, went out of business. So they had to redo the entire deal, and they were scrambling up until the beginning of the season, and even a couple of weeks in to get it right. The NFL was a little bit of a mess with COVID.
Yeah. And then when looking at like Brian Broadcasting as an example with Texas A&M, that they found that they essentially set up a plan in place. And if they could, they would use real-time video feeds within their studios or from the network itself. And then
Chris,
just
do you know Ben Downs?
Yes, I sure do.
He would be a great guy to call if you need advice on remote broadcasting, because they had the fewest problems of anybody I've talked to.
Yeah. And then they would pull surround sound feeds for the audio for additional effects if need be. And every now and then, I think in some cases, they did have to pull a few internet feeds if memory serves correctly. And then a few times they did actually have to have somebody on site with their iPhone, literally FaceTimed it right back to the studio. It's a different approach, but it shows you that with today's technology, there are several ways to do a remote. It's just now you need to plan out what are those steps, kind of like what Brian Broadcasting has done here, and just simply say, hey, look, let's do this if we can. If we can't do this, have your talent immediately go to plan B. And the final step that they ended up doing, and I do believe he said they ended up having to do this a few times, were phone calls back to the studio. They never actually did a pre-taped game, I believe, in this season.
No.
They still did it all live. It was just a different quality level for each one. They had a preferred method, but they did have their worst case method planned. And as you notice here too, they didn't have just a plan A and a plan B. They had a C, a D, and an E ready to go just in case. I've done a few remotes in my years here at Tieline, and I tell you, it's always good to be prepared. Especially in the days of POTS and ISDN, if we still had access to all of those transmissions readily available, I would say get all of them and just throw as much redundancy as you can on important mission critical links, whether it's programming from a broadcast or from a play-by-play or to your STL. More redundancy, the better, if you can accommodate it.
Can you imagine what this pandemic would have been like for remote broadcasting 10 or 15 years ago?
Or even more, it would have been way more
crazy.
expensive.
Would have been crazy.
High school's very similar. I won't go into this as much because they still had a very similar feel. Something they did do a little different is they did take codec mixing output feeds and feed that directly into video cameras, et cetera, to do the online video streams for high school sports. Because a lot of high school sports throughout the country limited access to the stadium for even fans to attend. So they still wanted to be able to give some sort of feed where the NFHS in Texas had a online streaming system. So to get that good play-by-play audio, they just took a local mix right into their video camera feed, essentially. So then that way they could have something a little better. But Doug?
And hold on, in a lot of cases with high school sports, they benefited from the split schedules. Because a lot of some of the seasons were delayed or put back to the spring, both in high school and college. We've got a client, Tarleton State in Stephenville, Texas. Their football season was last spring, so they got to use their good equipment all year long, all year round. They weren't spread out, so they weren't scrambling as much for the hardware stuff, for the good stuff. So I guess, Jake, you want me to take it from here?
Yep, I was going to say that.
Okay.
I believe this is
Take
you.
a drink of water and we'll bring you back in a minute. Remote broadcasting ain't going away. And I said this at this time last year, and I'm going to reiterate that again, that we are now in our new normal. And I think for a lot of reasons, and we're going to get into that right now. What seemed to be a temporary challenge is now permanent. A lot of people don't want to commute anymore. They don't want to be in crowded elevators. I know I don't. They don't want unsanitized work areas. A lot of people are resisting masks. And the freedom of working in a comfortable home environment is appealing to a lot of people. Jake?
Yep. And as an example to this too, just to add on, like Odyssey in San Diego, all of their employees, all of their talent have gone back home to do all their broadcasts from home again. In fact, they're doing some talk shows even now remotely too, where all the hosts are now remote from each other, which adds a whole nother layer of complexity for latency. And if you guys are more interested about that case too, I can discuss that later.
Well, that's one of the really cool things that the Gateway does is you can set up what we call a telecodec conference internally with the mix minus built into the unit. You can make everybody, however many feeds, 8 feeds, sound like they're all in the same room.
Yeah.
So Jake, let's move on.
Yep.
So you've heard about the great resignation wave. 25 to 40% of workers are thinking about quitting their jobs. How would you like to be a human resources manager now? Not me. Employees are asking, can I work fewer hours with more flexibility to create more personal time? A lot of people really like that, being at home with their cat in their lap, while they're on a Zoom call, or Mr. Buns in the background. I'm sorry, Amanda, I had to do that. Some quit because the company won't let them do it. Post-COVID, they're calling them back, and a lot of people are saying for either health reasons, religious beliefs, or just comfort of working at home, they don't want to do it. Some miss their offices, but companies are now hybrid or all remote. And, many find what they come back to is not what they left behind. There was maybe a crowded office now is kind of a lonely place to work, Others are switching careers entirely, and there are not much firms can do about this. It might be that people hated their jobs all along and just this was a good time to make a change. The human resources people may be able to retain some by offering as much flexibility as possible. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how all this plays out over the next couple of years. Jake? From the company standpoint, economists say a third of US jobs could be done remotely. For radio, fewer people in the building means stations don't need all the space they currently occupy. No more kitchen or jock lounge. That is going to go the way of the buggy whip and the dinosaur and, you know, the duck-billed platypus, if you will. In big markets, commercial office space and high visibility buildings where radio companies like to operate from, leases for $100 a foot or more. With an industry that's already struggling, this is an easy way to lower expenses. And this started about, I would say, the middle of 2020. You know that this was used as the impetus to go, okay, maybe we don't need this much office space and this is another way we can save. The remote equipment works great. The jocks like working from home, especially the single parents, and the GM gets to run the place leader. Jake? So what will be the role of the main studio going forward? You'll have a centralized location for technical infrastructure. It'll be a place for guest interviews, a place to update systems to broadcast from remote locations, a place to prepare today for similar emergencies tomorrow. And you should plan for the possibility of adding new air talent from anywhere using IP in this studio location. And I think everybody's doing that. Jake? So the features of the future main studio: smaller, less guest-centric, modular. You're not going to need, you know, a room with 5 microphones in it, because you're just not going to have people traveling to come to a central location to share germs. Expanded use of the cloud for all functional areas, flexibility with the ability to switch to remote on demand. And overall more remote, more support for remote contribution. So, you know, more and more you're going to need the infrastructure to accept more coming from outside. Jake? So what's next? Investment in better remote equipment. More hardware will be installed in home studios and in stadiums. Robust all-in-one solutions that stream, record, edit, and play audio from several sources, some from other remote locations, will be the most popular. And overall, an increase in audio quality of remote solutions. It makes sense because of it's the camping. No, you know, it's all right, enough of the camping. This needs to sound better. We need to make people sound like they're in the same room again. Jake? So we've been asking engineers for the last year and a half what their equipment feature wish list is. And this is not necessarily in order of preference, but they want multiple IP network connection options for quality and redundancy, configurable audio routing, onboard audio processing, separate IFB channels, ease of use, and remote control. And you know, the ease of use and the last two, to me, are key, because you guys as engineers are now managing so many more studios, and the ability to control things from remote locations is key, because the last thing you want to do on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon while you've got the Broncos game on is to get a phone call from talent that doesn't know how to turn the unit on, or, you know, can't connect correctly, or whatever the problem is. That probably is a 3-key fix. So being able to control a codec from your sofa or your office at the main studio is going to be key. You guys are doing such a great job, you know, with managing time and managing more studios. I think it's awesome. Ease of use. You know, we talked about the talent's aptitude to use technology. We sold before Alex Trebek died, we sold a VIA to Sony Television to be used in his house. And one of the selling points for the VIA, other than it being a great unit, was that you really only have to turn it on. And then you can control it with our cloud controller. And Alex Trebek only had to hit one button to connect. So ease of use is key, particularly with the talent that either begrudgingly won't learn it or can't learn the technology. Jake? So the byproducts of forced remote broadcasting, and I used this term a minute ago, expanded use of telecodec conferencing, making people from several locations sound like they're sitting around a studio table. Talent working from home will have to be more self-sufficient, we hope. Literally, they have to be trained on how to use this stuff. IP will become less frightening to people with little technical skill, we hope. It'll be forced on them. They'll have to do it, or else they won't be able to work in the same occupation. Renewed focus on failover, redundancy, and backup, because for the reasons we mentioned in the last slide, you guys have so many more things going on to manage, that to be less focused on or less worried about losing connections and backups is going to be key. IP connectivity is absolutely essential. If you're not using the right pipe to connect to your studio, then you're going to be left behind. Analog technology is going to go away. Jake, maybe you want to comment on this. It's not as capable as AOIP in adapting to other pandemic type situations.
It's just so much more expensive to roll out. I mean, as I'm sure, I have not had the personal pleasure of having to roll out a ton of XLR cabling or audio cabling through a studio, but I have had the pleasure of ripping it out before. And I know that is a ton of work compared to installing cat cabling or fiber optic cabling. It's 1,000 times easier. Yes, the cost might be a little bit more upfront for a higher end data transmission, but the cost savings of AOIP is just so much more beneficial in the long run for both expansion, growth, and just overall efficiency at the power level.
But as it relates to the quality, can you talk about that as well?
Oh, quality wise, you'll always find people who love analog, but digital is just as good. It sounds just as good, if not better, in my opinion. You can get a much higher sampling typically, and it's easier to work with, and you don't have to convert as much too, especially if you stay within the AOIP realm. Going from like an audio codec, yes, you're converting and compressing, but once you decompress, you're now just decoding the digital bits. If you don't have to decode, that's one less step in the equation. So it's more resilient too. Quality wise though, still superb.
So in addition, office, studio, and newsroom configurations are going to change, and you're going to have PPP everywhere. We're going to be wearing masks and using hand sanitizer and distancing things, for cleaning microphone, changing out microphone screens often, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be all of that going forward from now on. But, we're benefiting from this experience, and most of all, as engineers, I think you should give yourself a pat on the back for what you've done over the last 18, 24 months. It's been a grind, very difficult, challenging, probably rewarding too. So, this is from us to you. You guys have done a great job in keeping our industry rolling. So with that, Jake, I don't think we have another slide, do we? Other than maybe, yeah. These are references if you'd like them. I know you're recording, so these are the references that we used to research this slideshow. So, thank you for having us, and we'll stick around for questions if you guys have any. And we're going to do a raffle too.
Oh yeah.
Anybody have any questions? Any answers? I hear somebody rumbling. Well, then let's get to the good part. Amanda's going, make it me, make it me. All right, and the winner of the $50 Amazon gift card is Sean Richardson. Yay, Sean.
Thank you. How are you? Thank you very much. A wonderful
bet.
presentation, by the way.
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you very much. It was our pleasure. Amanda, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah, it was
You
great.
And if there are any questions afterwards, please contact us. It doesn't have to be on a Zoom call if you, and it doesn't have to be about our equipment. We'll help you with whatever audio issue you might have.
I've done just as many Comrex tech calls as I have Tieline at this point.
A couple of comments, if I might. I want to thank you guys for doing this for us. I know we were a small group tonight, but we do record it, and we'll probably get at least this many, if not more, that'll watch it at a later time. So you'll have a bigger audience than you did tonight. Earlier, you were talking about some of the sports remotes and some of the things there, and just anecdotally, my first job in radio was working for an AM station, which this is back when AM was king. But the FMs, nobody had radios, so they couldn't pick them up anyway. But one of the things that I did was recreations of out-of-town games for the local AA team. And and so what they did was, it's kind of the last thing on your list there. During the breaks, the talent, the play-by-play guy, he was in the studio with me, and he would go out in the hall and get on a phone call, and he would, in shorthand, write down all the stuff that happened during the last half inning. And then he would come in, and of course, during the break, I'm rewinding the crowd noise, and I have a stack of carts with foul ball, base hit, line drive, all these various sound effects. And we pulled it off, and it sounded good. I mean, who knew we weren't even really there? It just, so it can be done, and it was done, I'm talking back in the mid-70s. We used to do that way back when.
I thought you were going to tell me it was like way back in the 20s.
Well,
it
kind of feels like it now. The other thing I was just going to mention is that who can't afford a Bridget? I mean, seriously, we have hosts that have bought their own. We have clients that have bought their own Bridget, and they just love the quality and the ease of using it. And the price point is it's affordable for even individuals and so forth like that. So that's what we always recommend to people. When we've got a new client that wants to come on, they don't want to come in the studio. What do we need? Well, you can do it. We can do it with this Report It Live app. You can work under our license and do that. But the better solution is with the dedicated Bridget codec, and it just works like a hose, and it'll sound great, and you'll love it. And like I say, several of those have bought their own. So anyway,
Chris, you would be shocked how many people won't spend the money on the better equipment with failover and redundancy. It would shock you.
We run into a lot of times the classic barracks question of, do you have something around the barracks price point? no, here are the reasons why,
Mhm.
they'll typically go still get the barracks, and then 6 to 8 months later they call us back.
Whenever I get that question, I ask them, do you have a fire extinguisher?
It's yeah. Are you prepared to put out fires? And
It should
you-
come with one. It really should. And with a big warning on this could blow up at any time with a power surge.
Well, you get what you pay for. That's
Yeah.
been my experience. And
Sometimes you
also-
get lucky. Sometimes you get lucky with it,
Yeah.
you know, and if you want to take that chance and run out to your transmitter site, you know, in the middle of the night. you know.
Well, in fairness, we use barracks, not the little cheapies, but the more
Mhm.
expensive 1000s.
yeah,
We use them as tertiary backups at our
yeah.
transmitter sites, and they work fine for that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is when everything else has failed, and we're actually on an internet feed now.
It,
You know.
and it kind of goes to that list of priority. You want to have a plan in place, as you said. It's your tertiary backup, and that's okay. They all have their place. I've always said if you can make a barracks work, good for you, because they're not easy boxes to work with at first, or anything
right.
like that, like a simple RTP feed with no session header. They're not straightforward, but if you can set it up properly and get the networking down, it will work. It's just now how much time do you want to spend into that? And as you said, it's your tertiary, and it's a perfect place for it. In my opinion, I should say.
But you know, there are a lot of really small broadcasters that have no money, and you know, they're either charitable organizations or small religious broadcasters or just guys in small markets that they just don't have the money. And we try, and we tell
Well,
them, you know.
Amanda's an expert at setting up barracks, so call Amanda if you need to know how to make one work. The last thing I would say, you were talking about native access to automation systems. Really, we found more important than that, because typically we're using other things to control our automation, but it's the native AOIP access that you guys have through your WheatNet enabled boxes. And we just love that, being able to bring logic in and out and do things to and from our AOIP system with your equipment. I think that's just really important going forward.
We're also working on having native compatibility with some other
That's great.
deals as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
um,
already too, we've implemented a protocol called NMOS. Are you familiar with NMOS?
I've heard it. I don't know what it is.
So it's a control. Well, I say it's a control standard. It's really a set of standards set up to help integrate SMPTE 2110 and AES 67 and the world of IP. So video and audio for the broadcast world. And NMOS is there to help act as a middleman standard with its own server that essentially establishes an index of all of your AES 67 equipment and SMPTE 2110
Okay.
equipment. So now it's building an index, then you'll get registration, you'll get control. Down the road, you'll get metadata. Like as an example, the Tieline already supports, it's called NMOS ISO 4 and 5 are the two standards we support. And that's specifically for control, discovery, and registration purposes. So it helps us make it easier to integrate into like a Livewire system or a Dante system. And you can still get that same control level as what you were talking about. So yeah, as Doug said, we are expanding our AOIP capabilities quite a bit on the back end.
we can handle anything now. I mean, but not natively, which means that the only limitation is that we don't have the logic for the help me, Jake, for
The logic inputs and outputs
yeah.
to control like automation, etc.
Right.
WheatNet's the one exclusive as of right now in that area.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
I'll make sure this gets posted probably no later than Sunday. I'll try to get it sooner than that, but you can find our YouTube if you just look up the SMPTE-SBE 48. We've been trying to post our meetings there, but yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing everybody again online next month, not next week, because I won't be here next week for our next meeting, and some emails will be sent out about that in February.
Well, hopefully we get to see you guys in April at the NAB in person.
I hope so.
Fingers crossed.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, stay healthy.
Stay safe.
Thank you, guys.
Stay safe. Yep.
Good meeting you all. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us. Take care.